All right, thank you for joining the Minority Alliance organization meeting today. Today we'll be speaking on the prior voter turnout from the African American community uh, during the votes of the past 2 decades. Also, we'll be speaking a little bit on to after the election, depending if it is a Trump election or a Biden election, how we proceed as a minority community going further. Um, as far as me and Mark, we kind of divvied up uh, 1 decade and another decade when speaking on the African American vote and the numbers on that end. Um, and speaking on the front end of 2000, from 2000 to 2010, the elections and the black voter turnout during those years. In 2000, the main thing that stood out to me that I noticed was 13% of African American males were deemed ineligible to vote, whether that was due to prior convictions. um, they had not registered. That was still a very high number, within our community of people that had no voice over the 2000 election. When we look at the numbers during the 2000 general election, 56.8% of African Americans actually voted um, during that election, which you might as well say 50%. That's half of us, which uh, for an election, that type of turnout, that's not going to get us the results that we're trying to see currently, and the type of push that we are asking for in politics and from our politicians. How can we ask for that if we're not showing up to vote in those type of numbers? Going forward to the 2004 election, it was about 60% of African Americans that came out to vote, which was a big increase in numbers, believe it or not. I know it's only 4% on paper, but in numbers of people overall in the population, that's a very huge increase of people that actually showed up to vote in 2004 versus 2000, which, that actually shows that we were moving in the right direction. The issue in 2004 was in the Northeast and the South areas, regions of the United States. We were seeing low voter turnout from the African American community. So I think, in those areas, especially when you used to talk about the Northeast, that's your cities such as New York, Baltimore. When you're talking about the South, I mean, that does include a lot of the Texas area. That includes Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, things of those nature. And it always seems to be those states at where the African American vote is suppressed a little bit more. And in 2004, we could see that, clear as day in the numbers on paper, that's where it seemed to be a lower voter turnout, which I believe in those areas the numbers were around like 60%, 55%, 56% voter turnout in those areas during 2004. Um, Following the next general election in 2008, where we saw Barack Obama actually run and it being the first African American running for president, we actually saw one of the highest increase of African American voter turnouts at 64.7%, which, as I said, in percentage numbers, even looking at a 64.7%, when it comes to population, that's a huge number that showed out to vote. And we saw the outcome of that election was Barack Obama ended up winning. So it seems to me, from the earlier 2000s, if you're just looking at it in percentage of numbers and things of that nature, it seems most of the time when we come out in huge numbers and we show support and we do vote, we seem to have an impact on the process. And that's the biggest way we're going to actually impact the process, is showing up and voicing our opinion and letting ourselves be heard. The number one issue I saw with 2008 was the age groups between 25 and 44 were the lower groups of turnout that we needed in the African American community. So I only give you these the things that we failed to do in all these elections, to say these are all the things that we need to get right in this election going forward, if our voice is to be heard, if the impact that we are hoping to cause within our society is going to actually, the needle's going to start to move, then we have to get out and actually vote. That's step one. Um, Another thing in 2008 that was a huge issue that we're seeing the impact on it in 2020, 12 years later, was the felon voting rights. And these were issues that actually began being talked about uh, in the 2008 election cycle. And now we see that, that is moving a little bit further, which that was one of the biggest things hindering the African American community, especially when it comes to our numbers in males when we speak on the age group between 25 and 44 that couldn't vote. A huge group of those numbers who were deemed ineligible, came from those reasons, being felons and not having the right to vote. So, especially in the African American community, being that a large group percentage of us fall under that umbrella, this is another thing that we need to be pushing for going forward into future elections, um, to actually give these rights back to people, to be able to have their voice heard. Now, on the next decade, I'm gonna ask you, Mark. I know you did a little bit of research on the numbers on that end. Um, what were the impacts going forward following that 2008 election, where we saw a huge voter turnout of the African American community there?
So there's a few trends that we see that can definitely, that from the first decade that we saw translating through to the second decade of this century. And it all kind of ties in together. First things first, what we're seeing, we saw a huge turnout for the first Obama election. We saw a similar turnout for the second Obama election. And then what you see is this massive drop off. And one of the things that there are two basic patterns that I see in the numbers. When you start looking at the African American turnout, as we look through, what we saw, number one, is a high turnout, obviously for the two elections of Barack Obama, being that, that he was a Black candidate. The second thing that we saw is that African American turnout for vote seemed to be a lot stronger in presidential elections as opposed to midterm elections. There are massive drop-offs in midterm election years versus presidential election years. And just using the last 3 election cycles alone, what you see from African American turnout is on the presidential election, even though we had a very low voter turnout in the mid-50s, 56%, what we saw is the drop-off in midterm elections was even more significant. The midterm election of this past year, 2018, which did see an increase, it showed at 51.8% African American turnout, but 2014, 40.6% African American turnout for that vote for the midterms. And for a lot of people, what a lot of people may kind of fail to realize is that a lot of what's going on in our political climate today was shaped by that particular midterm, because that is the one where Democrats ceded control of the House and Senate to Republicans. That is where you see some of the things that we see today as far as policy blocking, as far as some of the proposals that have now come to pass that get passed in the House of Representatives and die in the Senate floor. A lot of those things come from that particular election. A lot of these Senate seats, these are 6-year appointments, and they were appointed in 2014, and we're dealing, some of those people are up now, and they're up in this particular election. But we saw that happen, and we also saw the exact same trends going on in age group as well. I mean, the difference between voting just by minority vote in age groups, there is a 22% participation swing between the 18 to 24 age group and the 45 to 64 age group. So there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, 18 to 24 may not be as politically savvy as someone who's a little bit older, has more on the line, is a little bit more worried about their tax bracket, a little bit more worried about, certain things in government like judges, like prosecutors, things like that. Another reason is that, obviously, 18 to 24, I mean, we have people going to school, we have people working, and they just don't participate in the process as much. And then the third thing, and this is crucial for the Black community, is that the higher percentage of that age group end up incarcerated. And when we're dealing with the incarceration and disenfranchisement of voting rights among those who've been incarcerated, among felons, we saw the exact same trend continue. And it is actually not until the midterms of 2018 that we actually began to see candidates, and we began to actually see rhetoric really geared towards changing that particular trend. We didn't really, you would hear a couple of people talk about it. You would hear a couple of activists talking about it who, spoke on voter suppression and spoke on the disenfranchisement of the Black vote and of the Hispanic vote as well, because it disproportionately affects those two groups. But it wasn't until the 2018 midterms that we began to hear, people, in specific races in Florida and in Georgia, where, the inclusion of felons voting, the inclusion of, of making sure that more voices get heard actually became a forefront issue. For a lot of people, because of that, this is a new issue to them. It's actually been going on for a very, very long time. Obviously we've been looking at it for the last, we've been looking at the last 2 decades worth, but this has been a constant thing. Suppressing and controlling who votes and how has been a really, really big part of how the power structure has remained a power structure. And obviously for both you and I, we've agreed based on the data that we've seen is that minority communities have such a stronger effect on local elections and down ballot elections because of the regional kind of concentration of where Blacks live. When I looked at the total electorate, our total electorate, going back over the last 30 years, the Black vote only accounted for 9.6% of the entire voting electorate back in 1990. And it's grown since then. It's grown to 11.9%, but that is literally only a 2.3% increase in the total voting electorate in 30 years. So what that says to me is that, number one, the disenfranchisement continues. And it's not just it's more than just a recognized issue now. It is more and more a serious problem because the Black population has grown since then. Our minority, as far as our total percentage of the population, has grown since then, but it's growing at a much faster rate than our voting electorate and our voting power. So to kind of sum it all up, we've had, when we have a stake in our, communities, down ballot elections, local elections, the years that we have turned out that vote, we have seen that we have the power to move the needle and to make change. For some reason, this doesn't seem to be as prevalent and powerful in midterm elections when it actually should be the opposite. We need to have, in some of those off years, some of those off elections, those runoff elections, those local city elections, those local state legislature elections, that's where we move the needle in local government and local policy building. And those things will eventually have a greater impact on national elections and bigger things like, the US Senate and things like that. But it's because we don't have, that strong foothold community, locally. And the more we look into this and the more that we, kind of get that vote out and turn out, people to, participate more, get more of those demographics, especially younger voters, and continue to press our politicians that we have elected into office who are talking about that disenfranchisement and talking about felons and talking about voting rights, talking about ending gerrymandering and holding them accountable to make sure that those things get done, because that's how we actually can get a more stable and permanent foothold in having the voting power that we need to move these things.
Yes, sir. And I mean, when you speak on the midterm elections and as you said, the more regional, local elections that we actually can change and we have a little bit of power to change, we have to realize when we continue to speak on the judicial system and the level of inequality that we are facing within the judicial system, we have to realize if we're not voting when it comes to who's your local sheriff, who's your local DA, and things of that nature, then those are the things that are going to cause the change that we're seeking within the judicial system and things of that nature. And those are the elections that matter as far as to how fast judicial reform actually happens within your area and within your region, based on those positions more so than anything. And also, we have to look into who are the judges in these areas and things of that nature when it comes to judicial reform, because that's one of the biggest things that we're trying to attack currently right now uh, when it comes to police brutality, the injustice that we uh, witness all across the judicial system, basically. And I mean, we have to look at who are the powers that enact these laws and the powers that actually police us and govern us in these areas, and how can we elect, people who push our rhetoric and push our policy within these areas. Um,
I mean, I was just going to say, we need to think about it as like this. When you don't vote, you are voting. When you don't participate, you are giving credence and you are giving power, and you are giving authority, and you are giving permission to those who are, kind of holding us in that position. We need to, get that vote out and make sure people are actually enacting that agenda. And it's not just, an agenda, it's just rights, period. There is no way we can physically change these things unless we have people who are willing to walk into these positions and change them. And if we can't hold them accountable to changing them, and we can't change that person out when they don't have our best interests at heart, when they have corporate interests at heart, when they're too busy trying to please somebody, when they're too busy trying to avoid a tweet, and when they're too busy, trying to deal with, getting the next large donor fundraising dinner going, our rights are not there. Our interests are not there. And those things are not going to stop. I mean, in order to end the things that we're dealing with police brutality, to end qualified immunity, to end some of the systemic, racist practices, policies, and issues that we're seeing, we're not going to get there with any single march. We're not going to get there with any email chain. We're not going to get there with any letters. We're not going to get there with any phone calls. We're going to get there by voting, period. There are people who know this and do everything in their power to try and stop it. And now more and more of our electorate, more of our people, more of our young people are understanding that the only way to fix this is to actually do it. So hopefully people can see, hear a message like this and, kind of see what's going on, pay attention to what's going on, participate more in what's going on, and be a part of that voice, be a part of that vote.
Yes, sir. And on that note, I also, wanted to state this, especially, as I said, for a lot of younger people, if you can't get into a position to actually work as a poll worker, even if you can give an extra 20 to 30 minutes after you place your vote or prior to you voting, and actually stand out at these polling places and be a show of representation of the minority community, and getting people, drawing more people, having people feeling comfortable to come vote at these voting places. We got to make our presence known at the voting polls this year, and that's one of the biggest things. So, especially when it comes to our minority, our members who are, college students and around that age, who actually have the time that you can dedicate to doing these type of things. We got to show a huge force when it comes to November 3rd this year. Uh, Everyone who was able to go out and protest all this year, this should be the biggest protest of the year. This should be the most that people actually show up. And as they say, show out and vote, show up and show out and let the numbers show that we, at least on paper, voted the correct way. As I said a couple of weeks ago, I would rather see, even if what we're hoping for by majority of us in the minority community does not happen, but at least we showed up in numbers, is showing that what we're actually protesting for and what we're fighting for is actually occurring, and the needle will start to move more and more the more we show up. Now, when we speak on following the November 3rd, and if we end up in a scenario to where Biden is president, you know, how do you feel, Mark? We go forward. I mean, personally, I feel if Biden gets in office, the things that the rhetoric that he's been giving in the debate, the rhetoric that he's been giving in interviews that he's talked on within the Black community, you know, I'm almost instantly, within the first few weeks, expecting him to start pushing within these directions and show gratitude towards the minority community for helping him actually to get in office, if that is the case. Now, personally, I'd like to hear from you, going forward, how you would feel about that in that type of scenario.
So the first thing I would say, as what it's basically like climbing a mountain, right? The very first thing that you want to have done is you want to get that first real foothold. You want a real anchor, and I want to see them. I want to see them, anchor. I want to see them get that first foothold, and that first foothold is passing and beginning to pass some of the more now than 400 bills that have been passed by the House. Things like $15 minimum wage, things like limiting the amount of money that donors can put in politics, things like voting rights acts, the John Lewis Act, things like the disenfranchisement of felons. All of those are bills that have currently been passed in House of Representatives and sit on the desk of the Senate. So the first thing I want to see is attack that. I want to see some of those things go in. A lot of the policies that we're asking for, at least the beginnings of them, are sitting there ready to go. And I want to see if those get pushed forward. I want to see if those, if people start trying to rework them, if people just completely ignore them. I mean, they're already passed. So I want to see, these things get enacted. I want to see these things come through. And then I want to see them begin to push the things that they've been talking about, being able to kind of turn clean energy and turn things like that into job creation programs, to see if we can, if they really are going to, allocate and reallocate some of the way that, policing is happening in the country, and using and reallocating funds to training and to screening and to, counseling and the sort of things that we, have heard people talk about, and the things that people have wanted to do and people are saying, and all those little promises or whatever. I want to see some policies and some actual budgets that have bullet points in them that we can see, that they can put it up and actually put to votes. They got the ideas on paper. I want to see that stuff turn into action. So realistically, I would say probably within the first, I don't know, maybe month or two of the administration, what I would like to see is, at least signs that those things are being put into action. Now, obviously, just like any other time, when you have an administration change, you have people who are trying to, kind of enact their own policies and trying to set their own things in motion and trying to undo damage, whether real or perceived, from the previous administration. A lot of people in the first year of the Obama administration said, oh, well, he didn't do any of the stuff that he was promising and he would do and things like that. And you also have to understand, we were also in the middle of a gigantic economic, downturn from the previous administration. You're in the middle of a landfill with a push broom trying to get that dealt with. So, there are going to be issues if there is a change of administration here. There are going to be issues with dealing with certain issues, certain things that are going on. I mean, we have a lot of problems both on the world stage and domestically that need to be handled as well, along with the agenda and the things that, we would love to see passed and the things that we would love to see done. So there's going to have to be some temperance when it comes to that, but there should still be movement, because a lot of those moves have already been made. and they're just waiting on an actual, on someone to actually enact them, put them on the Senate floor, put it to a vote, drop it in front of a president's desk so it can be signed. And so that's really what I want to see to start off with.
Yes, sir. And I mean, even as far as certain things, you spoke on a few of the voting rights acts. I mean, even when it comes to the John Lewis voting rights bill that actually was supposed to be being talked about in the House, and it seems that I don't believe it ever got passed within the time that they had to actually speak on it. So I mean, I think these are things that, as you said, they've been sitting on the table this long and should have been passed within the Senate and the House, and already on the president's desk to be signed. So these are
Mhm.
things that we got to start within. I mean, as you said, the first few months, but I would say by the end of the first quarter of the year, uh, us moving forward and it being a Biden actually winning the election to be in the Biden presidency, these are the things that we want to actually see done. Uh, on the flip side of the coin, we got to live in the real world sometimes, so we got to look at things on both sides of the
Mhm.
spectrum. And I mean, if we do look into a situation where Trump ends up being president uh, and will continue his presidency, uh,
Mhm.
us as a minority community, how do we combat that situation as far as it pertains to the policies that we're looking to get passed and things that we're actually looking to get done? Because I mean, I think the way it's been boosted up to this point, as far as Biden is such a sure in to win, that we might end up taking a gut blow if this is the turnout of the situation, and
Mhm.
the current movement could lose a lot of wind if we're not prepared the correct way going into a situation.
Right. So, you know, what's good in the beginning is still going to be good in the end, right? And one of the things that, one of the only positive things as far as momentum is concerned that has come out of the last couple of years is the fact that it has awakened more and more people in the Black community and in many other communities. I mean, quite frankly, in the white community as well, as to some of the unequal treatment that we're seeing on many different fronts and many different levels. If this administration were to continue, I don't believe that that part goes away. The only thing that worries me is, you know, how brazen does it get from here? Because to this point, none of the needles have moved, right? We have people who are now active. We have people who are now, waking up, so to speak. You have all the marches. I mean, the marches started in January of 2017 and have continued all the way up to and through now. So, there's always been this opposition thing here. So I think policy wise, again, it's going to come down to, I mean, even if Trump remains in office, who's running the Senate? Is it still under Republican control? If it is, you know, we go back to the beginning, we go back to where it started, which is, you know, local elections, state, city government that puts things in place that helps us on the ground level first. So that's where things start, and that part does not change. But if you have a situation where you have Trump as president, you have a Democratic Senate, I think the blessing there is that some of the more crazy and some of the more brazen policies, they're dead before they start. And some of the things that we're looking to pass could still actually be passed because you get a situation where you have, two branches, two houses of government, all speaking the same language, going in the same direction. He can't veto them all, you know, and you can actually get some things, right? You're not going to be able to get everything that you're looking for, but you'll be able to get some things. And again, we can go back to where square one of this whole movement begins, which is local. So I think that those are the two things that we need, that are realistic outcomes and realistic expectations if you see a Trump victory here.
Yes, sir. And I like how you spoke on, I don't know if you remember a couple of weeks ago when I was saying how it could end up being a checks and balance situation to where our best bet may be winning the majority over in the Senate and continuing to retain the House. And even if we do end up, as you said, with the Trump presidency in that end, we can still see some light in the tunnel, when it comes to at least it's you can clearly see who becomes the issue with policies that you support, and it's not a whole mix up as we are now with looking at even when you talk on the stimulus talks that are going on currently right
Mm-hmm.
now between the House and now the White House instead of the Senate anymore and the Senate majority. Um, but it's chaotic and it's something that it's very, I mean, to most Americans, I mean, I think we all see it as a simple situation, which you simply do this and this and okay, that at least continues to move our economy forward, especially when you hear about the bunch of airline workers who have just been furloughed. And I mean, you can imagine at how many of those uh, are part of the minority community and how this will directly affect the minority community when it comes to even as far as Lyft drivers, Uber drivers, when the airline is not moving at the capacity at which we need it to move to continue our economy moving in those sectors, it does affect our community, takes normally the hugest hit from economic downfalls and downturns. So, as I said, when we're looking at a House and the Senate that can barely get anything passed when that's the current situation, um, we've gotta have somebody working together on some front. So, you know, if there is a potential case with where Trump ends up being president, hopefully we can at least win over the Senate seats, and that way we can at least continue to talk about the policies that we were trying to get pushed through and continue to work on making these policies better to be able to fit for everyone.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, there needs to be governance here. And we have not had we have not had true governance in this country in at least 6 years. And that is because there is this deadlock of how things get done. And, we have some people who are, they're putting out ideas, and we have some that are putting out policies that go nowhere for people. And that's just been the checks and balances. That's not a partisan statement. That is a statement of results driven fact. And we're at a point now where we have a Democratic House, we have a Republican Senate, we have the Democrats again over 400 bills. They have been putting together policy. Getting they have been putting forward some of the policies and some of the ideas that you want. Now you do need both houses, to pass a bill, and then you need to put it in front of a president. So if you pass a bill and then it sits on the Senate desk and they don't even vote on it, it dies right there. And so too much of politics has been about playing to your base and revenge. You didn't vote on something that I wanted 4 years ago. Now you're not getting anything, that sort of thing. We need to be past that noise. So, whether you get a Biden presidency with a Democratic Senate and House and they start passing bills, or you get a Trump presidency with a Democratic House and Senate and they start passing bills, the passing bills part, that's the part. So, that's what we need to be looking out for.
Yes, sir. And I mean, again, as I said, we want to speak on, especially this week with what actually happened with the president. We want to speak on COVID safety within the minority community, it being that we have the highest number of cases within our community that, people honestly do have to be taking these safety precautions seriously. If you are around a large group of people, please wear a mask. Please wear a mask. Even if You know, you got to go to the store, buy a box of gloves, keep those on you for when you go in the grocery store and things of that nature. Wear a box of gloves so that we are not transmitting, because we're looking at the flu season. And as they said, I believe I was listening to Governor Kemp earlier today, they called it a twin virus season or something of the nature in that aspect. And you're going to have high cases with the flu mixed in with the COVID. And, you know, it's going to be hard to determine in a lot of people's cases whether they have the flu or whether they have COVID. So we have to take all safety precautions on that end within the minority community when it does come to COVID safety. As far as voting, as I said again, you know, uh, people need to be showing up to the polls and, you know, making our presence being aware of, because on the other side, there will be people, you know, showing their representation and showing their force and making sure that their voice is heard, and people who think like them and people who have the same ideology as them are being heard, and that their votes are going through uh, in that aspect. So we have to make sure on our end that we are showing a huge impact of support from the minority community for other minorities to come vote and feel comfortable at their voting places and at the polls and things of that nature. Um, if there's any other announcements that you had for this week and things looking forward going into, especially with the vice president debate tonight, Mark, on that end.
Yeah, I would say, you know, with the debate tonight, obviously you want to listen out for some of the policy and some of the actual intent and agenda that we did not get last Tuesday. We want to see, you know, and hear what some of these plans are. You know, what we do not want to hear is we do not want to hear Pence, you know, try to relitigate and rewrite the history of the last 4 years. What are you going to do now? What are you doing now? There's 210,000 people on the ground. What are you doing now? You know, we have people, you know, we you know, we still have, you know, black men being shot in the street, you know, people being shot in the back. We still have inequality. We still have police brutality. What are you doing now? What are you going to be doing? What is your agenda? You know, we need to hold people to account to that. The rhetoric Olympics need to be over. And, you know, we need to be able to hold people to account for that. So we need to listen out for it. And if you're not hearing it, you need to count that too. That's a part of the equation as well. You know, to piggyback on what you were saying about COVID, look, we need to treat this whole thing the same way we treat everything else. When your car is broken, you do not listen to your neighbor. You do not listen to your aunt. You listen to a mechanic. When your plumbing is bad, you do not listen to a hot dog salesman. You don't listen to the cable man. You listen to a plumber. So we need to stop listening to politicians about medicine and health. You know, we need to pay attention. We need to actually talk to doctors. We need to listen to people who have degrees and went to school and who are invested in the safety of you and your family. We need to, you know, get out there and make sure that we're voting. We need to make sure we're taking our proper precautions, keeping our distance, making sure we're in line. If you are in line, they will let you vote. We need to make sure that you're wearing your PPE. You need to make sure you're wearing your mask and your gloves. I run a restaurant, and that is that is the thing that we hold in the greatest of supply. You know, so I literally spend a couple $100 a week making sure that we have the amount of gloves and the amount of masks that we need in order to keep safe. Because at the end of the day, none of this means anything if we can't go home and if we can't, you know, be safe. So we need to do that. We do need, you know, people watching polls. I mean, you know, there are people being mobilized right now who have a vested interest in intimidating people. I'm from Michigan. They just arrested a guy who was running a scam up there, calling people, telling them, hey, don't send in a mail-in ballot. They're going to use that and give it to debt collectors. And if you have warrants, they're going to come after you. None of that's true, but they put that stuff out there. This is all suppression and turnout. If you do not have policy and you do not have ideas, your only goal is suppression. And that's what we're seeing on a massive scale. So we need to, you know, pay attention, get our information from trusted sources, get your information from actual experts. Politicians are experts in one thing, politics, period, full stop. And we need to pay attention to that and get our info from our experts, be safe, and do what we need to do.
Yes, sir. And on that end, we're going to wrap up tonight. And as you said, you know, going forward, especially with November 3rd. What do we got? 27 days left now. So people have 27 days to determine, you know, well, if you're registered already, which we put out a post on Monday to make sure that people went ahead and check their registration status. If you did feel that you registered and you haven't been yet online to check your actual registration status to make sure that your paperwork did go through without any error, make sure you actually go do those things also and double check back behind yourself on your registration status and make sure you're good to go come November 3rd.